Okay, we have this particular chapter called Poets and Pancakes, which is part of your Flamingo textbook. So before starting the particular chapter, because many of you could find it a little complex and very vague. Okay, so what I have done is to prepare, I wouldn't call it a summary, but to kind of tell you the 10 pointers that you need to bear in mind before we get to the explanation of the story line by line. Okay, which I will do subsequently. But before that, I thought this particular short video to give you an overview of the story so that when we get into the story, it's a little easier for you to understand it. Okay, so it's called Poets and Pancakes, part of your CBSE English Class 12 Flamingo textbook. Now, this particular story is set in Gemini Studios in Madras. And the story was written by Ashok Mitran. You find the person on the extreme right in red shirt. He's Ashok Mitran. Okay. Now, this is taken from his book called My Years with Boss at Gemini Studios. And his boss was S.S. Vasan, a very prominent producer, filmmaker from Chennai, from Madras as it was known then. So, and he owned Gemini Studios. So this particular chapter is taken from this particular book called My Years with Boss at Gemini Studios. What you see in the middle of those two boys, the twins, that is the logo of Gemini Studios. So before any Tamil film, and they made some Hindi films as well, this kind of an audio, this kind of a visual would come of these two boys blowing the trumpet. That was the two Gemini twins. So Gemini Studios, along with AVM Studios, Vijay Vahini was one of the more prominent studios at that time in the Tamil film industry. Now, Ashok Mitran is the pen name. That's not his real name. His real name was Jagdisha Tyagarajan. Okay, Jagdisha Tyagarajan. He passed away in Chennai in 2017. He was in fact born in Secunderabad. Now, Gemini Studios, interestingly, let me tell you a bit about Gemini Studios. As I said, that's where this entire story is set. It was bought over in 1940 and renamed as Gemini Studios. Okay, now, right now, and it became defunct in 1975, which means that only for 35 years, now why only? 35 is a long time. 35 years it ran quite successfully, but by 1975, things were not looking good. So it went, defunct. Right now, in fact, those of you who are from Chennai would know this. Those of you who are not, let me tell you this. There is a hotel called Park Hotel, which is located on the premises where Gemini Studios was. And in fact, the flyover near it is still called Gemini Flyover. Okay, that's interesting, right? Gemini Studios is not there, but the flyover is named after that. So it's called Gemini Flyover. And I have stayed at Park Hotel several times. So Park Hotel, and I didn't know this story before. Okay, and only subsequently I learned about it. If you see the corridors leading to the rooms, it is all kind of, there are a lot of film posters of old films, Tamil films, Hindi films, etc. There are these posters which are there between different rooms, okay, in the lobby, in the corridors, right? And I always used to wonder, what is this whole filmy connection? Later on, I realized it's because of the Gemini Studios connection that it is, they have put this as kind of a reminder of the kind of place on which it is located. Now, let's move to what is the meaning of the title, Poets and Pancakes? Now, what you have essentially is a number of poets who are part of this particular story. The first poet, and I am breaking this down so that it's easier for you to understand when we actually do the explanation of the story. The first poet is the man who applied makeup to artists. He fancied himself to be a poet, right? The second poet is a man called Subbu, who was actually the number 2 at Gemini Studios, right? He was like, he could be a filmmaker. He was a part-time actor. He was also a poet. Okay, so he's another poet. Then there are lots of poets who used to hang around at Gemini Studios, right? So that's why it's called Poets and Pancakes. So it was a favorite haunt of many poets who used to hang around at Gemini Studios, right? And many of those names are mentioned in the story. There is also another poet, an Englishman, an editor of a magazine who comes to Madras, and he's also an English poet. So you realize that the story is actually full of poets. Then Pancake. What is Pancake? Now, Pancake was the brand name of the makeup that was applied by Gemini Studios to artists. That is anyone, hero, heroine, junior artist, villain, सपोर्टिंग आर्टिस्ट, एनीवन, उनको मेकअप लगाना पड़ता था. सो मेकअप जो लगाते थे उसका ब्रांड नेम होता था पैनकेक. So that is why the name Pancakes. So poets and pancakes, I hope you are not now able to understand. Okay. In fact, in the story, it says Vaijantimala would have used it, but Rati Agnihotri would not have used it. Now, why? Because Rati Agnihotri came into films only in the year 1979. And what year, which year did I say that the Gemini Studios went defunct? 1975. So by the time she came into films, Gemini Studios was no longer there. And obviously, Pancake was associated with Gemini Studios. Okay. Now, apart from these characters, there are some other characters who are also important. The first of them is a character of the legal advisor, who was some kind of a lawyer who used to advise Gemini Studios management on legal matters. Okay, but his name was listed in salary terms, etc. His name was mentioned in the story department. Why? No one knows. So subsequently, one day when the story department was shut down by Gemini Studios, the lawyer lost his job. So that is a bit of the humor that, the first time when a story department is being shut down, a lawyer lost his job. Then poets generally who used to hang around there, they were averse to communism, means they did not like communism as an ideology, right? So that is an important, because the second half of the story is basically about communism. Communism as in the kind of ideology that we find in Russia. There was this case where the Moral Rearmament Army of Frank Buchmann, they visited Madras in the year 1952, some 200 members, and they presented two plays which were big hits in the sense that people appreciated the kind of production design and various aspects of those two plays. One was Jotham Valley and the second one was The Forgotten Factor. Okay, these two names you would need to remember. Now, why is this MRA, Moral Rearmament Army, important? Because it was seen as a counter movement to communism. It was anti-communism. So in that sense, it would be more pro-capitalist kind of a thing. I'm sure you would have studied all this in your democratic politics or in your civics lessons, right? So it was a counter movement to communism in the world. So the author asks a question. So did S.S. Vasan, the owner of Gemini Studios, get fooled that these people have come and staged these two plays? And I mean, because he assumed that S.S. Vasan would also be pro-communism and not anti-communism, right? That's how he kind of assumed. Then there was this case of an editor from England who was described as a poet. As I mentioned, he visited Gemini Studios. There is this entire anecdote about that. We will talk about that. His name was Stephen Spender, and we will talk about that when we do the story. Now, the more interesting part is that, because the question was, what was an English poet, English editor doing in a Gemini Studios kind of thing, which was making Tamil films. Now, the author subsequently finds a book called The God That Failed. And in one of the essays, he finds the name of Stephen Spender, that he had written one of the essays. So he kind of gets very interested in it, right? And that's when he realizes that Vasan was also against communism, and therefore Stephen Spender had been hosted by Gemini Studios at the studios, right? So that was the reason. So he only later on realized that S.S. Vasan had not been taken for a ride. He had not been fooled. On the contrary, he had invited Stephen Spender with an agenda, because he knew exactly that that he was against communism, and that was also the reason the MRA was allowed to stage plays. So The God That Failed was on the disenchantment, the disillusionment with communism, right? And that's where Stephen Spender had also written one of the essays along with 4 other authors, right? So this is precisely what happens in the story. I wouldn't call it a very engaging kind of a chapter. Let me say that right at the outset. My intention, my aim, my hope would be to make it as interesting as possible for you students. So I thought, let me make a small summary, which I normally don't do, because I like to jump into the story straight away so that वो story का interest रहता है, right? इसमें वो picture जाने से पहले कहानी सुनने वाला किस्सा हो जाता है, picture movie देखने से पहले you listen to what the story is, who is the villain, how does the murder take place, kind of a thing. But this story is not like that, and this is slightly vague kind of a story, which I thought. So I thought, let me just tell you this in this brief summary. Subsequently, we will do this particular chapter, maybe one part or 2 parts. It's a little long, about 10 pages. So we may do it in 2 parts so that it's easier for you to kind of understand. And subsequently, we will do the notes and the questions and answers also. Okay, Tata, bye-bye.